So welcome to lecture 2 on Flannery O'Connor's Wise Blood. I'm going to pick up on chapter 3. I left off discussing chapter 2. I just want to repeat, because it's worth repeating, the theological lines, contours, shape of our hero Hazel Motes, and his whole mind. Right. This novel is about religion. It's about Christianity, but specifically, it's about certain aspects of Christianity, and that is the fallen nature of what Christianity argues is the fallen nature of human beings. That there's something deeply wrong with human beings. That human beings are broken, and that all human beings share in this condition of brokenness, and that condition of brokenness is largely the result of human action. That's the situation that Hazel Motes has grown up in, and his life, his early life. He must be at this point 22, 23, 24 years old, just got out of the army. His life has been dominated by religious sensibility, the religious sensibility of his grandfather, who was a preacher, whose basic idea of Christianity was you're a sinful, wretched creature going to hell, eternal damnation, and that Jesus' sufferings on tremendous sufferings, really, the goriness of it, the attention to the suffering of Christ leads to your redemption. So it's all violence, it's all guilt, it's all shame, and while Hazel is in a situation of comfort and support, he seems to think that this is a reasonable life for him. He think he's going to be a preacher like his grandfather. He goes in the army. He's neglected. He becomes corrupted. His sense of loneliness leads him to engage in activities, of course, seeking connection. It's not clear what he does, but it's clear that he loses his faith. He's on his way back to East Rod, Tennessee. He realizes everything's gone. His house is dilapidated, nothing left. There's an attachment to his mother that he has that is also gone, right? So he's on his own, friendless, and he goes to Talkingham. He's seeking to run away from Jesus, the figure of Jesus. Why? Because Jesus reminds him of his sin, of his, and this is too much to take, right? The guilt and the shame of this is too much to bear. So the collision of guilt and shame on the one side and redemption on the other. This is in lived condition of human existence, this becomes at least the way it's taught by, and the way Hazel understands it, this becomes a very difficult situation psychologically to handle. So Hazel is intent upon eradicating this idea of Jesus from his very existence. Of course, it's woven into his very existence because he's a child. And so it's not that he can just leave it behind. He's going to have to, in some ways, exercise it. He's going to have to, some way, violently remove this piece of furniture from his mind. What he'll come to realize is it's not a piece of furniture. It's the actual house. His mind is the house in which these ideas live. So This is the process. So this is where we find Hazel in chapter 3. And this is a very funny scene, comic and humorous, but also extremely, in some ways, painful. Um, the encounter with the potato peeler. So people on the streets selling things, selling potato peelers. I'm sorry, and him is this blind preacher and his daughter, and the the um, the scene of the potato peeler where he can't help but Hazel can't help but confront everybody sees, about about his obsession with Jesus. The humor of most of this is that um, nobody else cares. Hazel is really the serious one. Most people are not as obsessed with this. They might be a little uneasy, but or they totally just are not even interested in Christianity. But Hayes' obsession here is one of the tensions here. So the preacher whose name is Asa Hawks and his daughter Sabbath, they're arguing at pages 45 to 46 because Hazel keeps following them, and he's obsessed with them. And there's a kind of humorous argument between the preacher who thinks that um, that Hazel is following him, and Sabbath says no, he's following me. And this is her father, and he ridicules her. Why would he follow an ugly girl like you? I mean, this is terrible. At least psychological abuse and neglect. Treating your daughter like this, talking to her as though she's worthless and nothing. So we get the sense of already of her lack, her need for love, her need for affirmation. Her mother is gone, obviously. Father doesn't give it to her. So the humor of it, and of course he's following both of them. She kind of representative of probably sexual attraction. He representative of the obsession of Jesus that he's trying to eradicate. By the way, notice the way he does it. He has to eradicate it in other people. He can't overcome it in himself. But the way to overcome it is to convince other people that Jesus doesn't matter. This is a very interesting psychological aspect of Hazel's behavior. So we get Hazel's theology of sin, which is very insightful at the very beginning. At the age of 49, at page 49, he says, "If I was in sin, I was in it before I ever committed any. There is no change come in me." This is a very interesting way of articulating the doctrine that Christianity holds of original sin. You're born into sin. This is what the church teaches. This is what Christianity teaches, that you're born into sin. All are born into sin. I'm not going to defend this position, but this is the account that is given to explain the way in which people, even at a very young age, share in the brokenness, the fallenness of human nature. There are, of course, other ways of explaining this through psychology, or to just simply deny it and say everything's okay. But if you look around and see in the world, the explanation is that everybody participates in it. There's nobody free. There's nobody innocent. And this is the doctrine of original sin, right? That it's inherited somehow. It's passed along. So I think O'Connor accepts that, and Hazel does too. She also accepts the psychological elements of this that are that these are passed on as behaviors too, um, from parent to child, and the faults of the parents get passed along willy nilly without even any understanding of it, and are retained by the children. And we see this in all of these broken characters. They've been wounded from the very start. So Hazel is like his point of that is, hey, it ain't your fault. What's the point of fighting this, right? And the converse of that, right? The other side of a coin is that Christ, because there's sin, there's Christ in his mind, right? And that's true of Christianity, because there's sin, there's redemption. Those two things are essential in Christian thought and Christian practice. The flip side of that in Hazel's mind is that nothing matters but that Jesus don't exist, right? So again, he's going to go after getting rid of Jesus. Once Jesus doesn't exist, then there's no condemnation. So he sees these two doctrines together, and he sees that Christ means condemnation. The existence of Christ means condemnation and guilt and shame. It's too much to bear for him. So that's the point. He's not going to. Sin doesn't matter. Better get rid of Jesus. If he exists, then we've got a problem. Then we've got to acknowledge this other aspect of us. That's very painful to acknowledge. So that's the theology. And O'Connor has done a very brilliant job of bringing this to life, this essential doctrine, the coherence of sin and Christ as Redeemer, in a drama, a psychological drama that reveals something about that dynamic, fundamental things about that dynamic psychologically. All the discussion always goes back to theology. He's obsessed with this, and he's having these conversations. He keeps saying, "My Jesus, my Jesus." The use of that term, "my Jesus," is mocking, right? It's like, oh, that happened. I can't believe that. My Jesus, can't believe that. It's a tone of mocking dismissal. So again, the use of that of Jesus as a mocking term shows a kind of blasphemous approach of Hayes. This would have shocked his grandfather for sure. So Hazel announces, because he's a preacher, right? He becomes the preacher that he always thought he would be, but it's the antithesis of his grandfather. The church of truth without Jesus Christ crucified. We'll see a number of different permutations of this idea of a Christ, church without Christ. To get rid of Christ is the key. Again, so the next character we meet in this is Enoch Emery. These will be the main characters: Asa Hawks, Sabbath Hawks, and Enoch, and they have two different relationships with Hazel that bring aspects of Hazel's character out. Enoch is another wounded character, young kid, 18 years old, neglected, alone, on his own, lonely. He works in the zoo, and his sexuality is being awakened here, and it's very immature. Obviously, it's almost animalistic, and the zoo is a weird sort of I don't know, objective correlate or symbol of his own kind of degraded approach to human sexuality. So the um, the the scene of them meeting, um, Hazel has this look of being haunted by Christ. Um, Enoch says, "I knew when I first seen you, you didn't have nobody nor nothing but Jesus." Um, and the novel's title is introduced here. We'll see it. We'll see this term "wise blood" used again. But Enoch says to Hazel, "You act like you think you got wiser blood than anybody else." Wiser blood. Um, so, what does the name "wise blood" mean? Well, it's this. The blood is the symbol for these lower desires, bodily desires, eating, but mostly sexuality here. This novel is heavily imbued with a sexual component, um, and the sense of that human instinct, um, that we share with the animal world. So notice that Flannery is she's certainly not a prude. These are serious subject matter that she's dealing with head on, not denying the elements of the body and sexuality, but putting them at the center of the drama. Any form of Christianity that denies the body is not even worth discussing, really. It's not Christianity. That's the point she makes about In Nature, Name of Fiction. The novel deals with the matter of the world, the stuff of the world. So that's part of Christian doctrine, right? That the idea that God, in the person of Jesus, took on human flesh and became a human being to experience these aspects of the human body, suffering and being linked to other people and having to suffer with them and enjoy things with them. So this idea of wise blood, right? The body symbolized the blood, and through desires, usually sexual, and this higher sense of reason or rationality or wisdom. How to combine those two? Well, with these two characters are very immature. So how they come to grips with their own desires. Part of the other thing is the desire is violence. Interestingly enough, O'Connor has latched on to, in her representation of these two characters, the two key elements of the later Freudian thought, which is eros and thanatos, the drive for sex and the drive for violence against others. So these two really do sort of articulate these kinds of poles of human behavior that we find in Freud. O'Connor coming to grips with this and representing it in the context of Christian drama. So does he have wiser blood? That's probably true. Enoch, Enoch will succumb. Both of them will, actually. Does Enoch ever realize the significance of his own violent actions, his own murderous actions? He slips away. Probably. Hazel does. Hazel. They both murder somebody. They both wind up killing people in this novel. Enoch becomes a gorilla, as we'll see. Hayes, becomes something else. So we've got the lines of development here. The Ace of Hawks symbolizing Christian doctrine of sin and redemption. Sabbath as a sexual, uh, um, an object of sexual desire. I don't mean that in a degraded way, but representing sexual longing. By the way, the good aspects of sexuality too. Sexuality is the expression of intimacy and caring, and we'll see that that's touched upon in some of these scenes by O'Connor. It's not just merely base and degraded. It's degraded when it's placed in this context, without love, without human love. But yeah, that love and desire and sexuality, and then in Enoch, the drive for affirmation, the drive for some sort of power over one's life, and ultimately the turn to violence in order to get that. So this is pretty clearly dramatized in the novel. So scene 4, we don't get very many descriptions of landscape, the sky and the landscape. But when we do, we should notice them. It becomes symbolic. It was a wet, glary day. The sky was like a piece of thin, polished silver with a dark, sour-looking sun in one corner of it. This is not particularly hopeful, a day like this, right? Dark, sour-looking sun, kind of probably like an eye peeking in, and this thin silver, gloomy, glary and gloomy, really. Glaring, kind of shimmering ugliness. And it's in that situation that Hazel buys his car. 65 is a high rat-colored machine with large, thin wheels and bulging headlights. And again, what she says in Nature and Aim of Fiction, that this is a symbol of freedom. It's a false symbol. Hazel thinks this is going to take him places. It's going to allow him to escape his obsession with Jesus. It leads him right to it. What's the point of that? We human beings think if they can change their location, they can change their predicament. It works the other way around. You change internally, and then you change your situation. But Hazel is not quite mature enough for that. He's going to have to come to rock bottom to start thinking about looking inward. Everything is directed outward, trying to change things around him rather than change himself inside. So the rat-colored automobile, I think, is humorous and fun, ugly looking thing. Hazel buys it for $50 and drives around in this thing and feels like he's in control, feels like he has power. Obviously, Hazel, if we look at this, Hazel's not working. Obviously, he's on disability. He's been injured in some way in the army, and here he is, gets a paycheck, but doesn't have to work. Probably not a good thing for a guy like this, right? So chapter 5 leads into Enoch Emery and his wise blood. His wise blood is really just a kind of base, degraded sexuality. He has this ritual that he goes through every day. The heart of the city, which is this swimming pool, right? It's just this secret that he wants to share with everybody else, right? Symbolizes the kind of open carnality without guilt. he can't believe that people are in bathing suits, swimming around in public. He thinks this must be some private place that this is how immature he is, right? How isolated he is, how he's grown up without any help whatsoever. So he goes to the park, he goes to the Frosty Bottle and gets a root beer. He looks at the girl who tries to who serves him, and then the meeting at this heart of the city, what he calls it, the zoo, and then there, right? And again, the zoo becomes this weird place where the animals, people are attracted to animals. It's a weird sort of sense of looking at ourselves, I think, and our own linkage with them. So he looked like a devil, it says. There's a scene in Milton's Paradise Lost where the devil leers at Adam and Eve. I think he's a voyeur, right? He seeks sexuality. He watches it from afar, but he's afraid to engage in it because he has no confidence, right? And he's not been initiated into it by adults who would teach him that this is an outlet for love and human intimacy, right? So this is the wounded nature of Enoch Emery. O'Connor describes him at 83. Enoch's brain was divided into two parts. The part in communication with his blood did the figuring. So there you've got body and mind, right? But it never said anything in words, right? So, if your mind is not articulating anything in words, it's probably a highly developed mind, right? We've seen in Hamlet, right, that discourse, words, that's the stuff of human reason. To be able to articulate things in words is a sign of reason. And when you can do that, you can gain some sort of self-knowledge, right? And perhaps have some ability to control your body, or at least lead it in proper directions, right? The body should be led by the mind. So it never said anything in words. The other part was stocked up with all kinds of words and phrases. So you've got this set of images and ideas that are all part of this sense of himself, right? And those things are all of a sensible, sensuous nature. So this is Enoch divided. He's divided within himself. He can't control himself. Is all it's going to take is one moment of stress, and Enoch's inner need for affirmation and for human connection. He's a very lonely person. That's going to come out, but it's going to come out in negative ways. Freud is right. If desires are not met with, but are suppressed, they are repressed, they come out in evil ways. They come out in negative ways. Hazel again joins Enoch at the Frosty Bottle. I am clean, he says. If Jesus existed, I wouldn't be clean. There's that obsession with Jesus, right? Very brilliantly articulated idea of the doctrine of Christianity and redemption. Jesus doesn't exist. All bets are off, right? I'm clean, right? Notice the obsession with cleanliness. It's an interesting point. It's not that everything's okay. No, I'm sorry. It's not that. It's a way to totally eradicate any sense of anything that's wrong. Um, so um, that Hazel has latched upon in his brilliant way a deep insight that Christianity has. If there is something wrong with if everything's okay, well then murder, um, hurting people, violence, all of these things are just things that happen. Um, we shouldn't take moral stances on them. Maybe we should try to avoid them. Maybe we should do some sort of tidying up. But to have a deep moral confrontation with evil, there's got to be a sense of something like sin. So Hazel wants to eradicate it all. I'm clean, he says, if Jesus doesn't exist. I'm clean. There's nothing wrong. That's going to be the conflict, right? To try to convince himself that there's nothing wrong with him. He's not suffering. So if you feel the sense of suffering in the world, and that's where Christianity comes in. Is it the solution to it? Well, that's not something that O'Connor is dramatizing here. She's really just dramatizing what Christianity would offer in some way, or might offer, or maybe even lesser than that. She's dramatizing the deep sense of human suffering that Christianity addresses. Hazel Motes and his form of Christianity doesn't seem capable of solving that. So one of the secret place, right, is the museum, right? Other places that have this weird carnality. You've got the museum, and the strange events of the mummy, right? Of seeing this mummy that becomes a form of obsession in a way. Why is the mummy so important? Well, we'll have to see. I think at this point it's a mystery, right? But I'll say at this point it's the image. People are all fascinated with mummies, right? It's an image of death, right? It's an image of the destiny of all of human nature. Here's this character who's been dead for millennia, right? Still preserved. The desire to stay alive or keep the body intact, even as it's dead, right? A kind of death in life. The mummification of human nature. This collision between death and life. That's what the mummy comes to represent, and the destination of all people who have to die. We all have to die, right? So it's this weird mystery. Enoch doesn't quite understand it, but it draws him and attracts him. It becomes a weird sort of figure of redemption later on. They leave here. Hazel wants the address of the preacher and his daughter. Enoch won't give it to him. One gets the sense that Enoch won't give it to him because he's interested in Sabbath hawks, perhaps, and thinks Hazel is too. So there you get the sense of a kind of brotherhood, weird brotherhood, but also a conflict, two males in conflict over the female, and this comes out in a violent action where Hazel just punches Enoch, blood on his face. With Enoch with this exalted look, the word exalted, it's very strange. Exalted look. What does that mean? Exalted. Um, he should be humiliated, but this awakens something in him. It awakens some exaltation, some form of overcoming. It's a brilliant insight on O'Connor's part that sometimes violence can unleash not just humiliation, but it's some sort of release. So being struck and being bloodied becomes an opening for Enoch. Violence finds its way in there. So we get the kind of drama unfolding here, and we find in chapter 6 Hazel begins preaching the church without Christ. It's funny. It's just funny, and it's obsession, repetition of Christian themes. It's where the blind don't see. There's that image of blindness that will pick up. The blind don't see. Remember, Christ performs miracles in which he makes the blind men see. Where the blind don't see and the lame don't walk, and what's dead stays that way. So interestingly enough, Hazel has sort of centered himself upon one of the solutions of Christianity. Christianity claims to heal. Christ claims to heal us of our wounds, right? That has to be gotten rid of. There's no solution for that. Sure, we have medicine, but the drive to find some sort of way of keeping ourselves alive forever is a kind of extended eternity on earth. It still doesn't solve the problem of human misery. I've written a couple of poems about Flannery O'Connor. I'll post them, where I talk, or where I mention that aspect of her life. Her own sense of her own. The lupus ravaged her. She was an attractive woman who literally became grotesque and ugly because of the medicine, the lupus itself, and then the medicine, and her sense of the need for healing had rarely very little to do with her body, although it did have something to do with her body, but mostly internal. It's getting rid of the pain that we feel in the wounds that we have from childhood, the wounds and the evil, the bad things we do to others that we don't wish to do. Right? St. Paul said, "The evil I wish to avoid, that I do. The good that I wish to do, I don't do." It's that problem that Christianity and Jesus, the introduction of Jesus, is meant to come to solve in some way, or to be at least a hope for solution. So Hazel is lit upon that, right? If Jesus doesn't exist, there's no solution to human misery. Just get used to it, right? Just get used to it. It is the church that the blood of Jesus don't foul with redemption. So the idea that it fouls redemption is a fouling, tainting thing, right? That's the side of it. If redemption exists, well, it means we're tainted and foul. That's the thing that Hazel can't look at, the foulness of his own existence, because of the way he was taught Christianity. So he goes on, there was no fall, because there was nothing to fall from. There was no perfect world. There was no, human beings weren't created perfect, and fell in some way by rejecting God. And no redemption because there was no fall, and no judgment because there wasn't the first two. And the judgment really is the key. He does not want to be judged. I'll step back and give a little, since Freud, I've mentioned Freud. This really does pit Freud and the modern conception of Christianity against Christianity. Christianity asks human beings to accept the fact that they have violated and they participated in breaking their relationship with the author of the universe, right? That requires acknowledgement of that to the author of the universe. That's a kind of scary proposition. Freud proposes that Christianity projects God as a way of assuaging our conscience and making us feel better that really God's in control, and God is like, the desire to go back into the womb for Freud is a desire to, that's God. God was projected there. After death, we can slip back into the womb. That's not Christianity. Christianity is a lot scarier than that. And requires not only facing one's own ways in which we hurt people and ourselves, but also facing the fact that we're in some ways unguarded. We have to open ourselves up to suffering from others and participate in that. So Hayes isn't getting to that point. Hayes is really what I want to suggest here is the fear of judgment. That's a latent fear in Freud and Freudian psychoanalysis. The fear that, oh no, there might be a God, and that God might judge me as insufficient. What do I do then? And of course, we constantly want to avoid looking at ourselves. So you see the way in which O'Connor has, within a Christian framework and within a Christian drama, has transposed the Oedipal drama into this modern novel. Right? Oedipus not wanting to look at himself for fear of finding something in himself that will not be able to be overcome, or will be difficult to overcome, or will be painful to admit. His own limitations, his own weaknesses. And that's what we find in Hayes, the refusal to judge for judgment. So again, Freud and Oedipus comes back into this novel in interesting ways. So again, this is the logic. There was no fall because there was nothing to fall from, and no redemption because there was no fall, and no judgment wasn't the first two. The judgment, the logic of this, the judgment, is what Hazel wants to avoid. So he finds out where Asa Hawkes and his daughter live. He moves into their boarding house to be close to them. And we find the motives here. Hazel wants to seduce Hawkes' daughter to cause him to lose faith. If I can seduce his daughter, I can show that sin is greater than his preaching. The obsession with sin is really the big problem here. Sin, in Hayes' mind, is the stumbling block to Christianity. Notice there's a contradiction there. So really, it's a contradiction of if there is no Jesus, there's no sin. Well, it works the other way around too. So if I can convince him that sin is greater than Christ and Christ's redemption, I can make him lose his faith. Notice He's obsessed with other people losing their faith, just like him. He needs to have them agree with him to make him feel better about himself. That's the psychology of this. He doesn't realize that Asa Hawks has already lost his faith. He's a sham preacher. He's just pretending to be blind so he can make some money. He's a sham preacher. There's tons of these guys all over the place, especially in the 50s and 60s. They're all on television now. Go take a look on television. You'll find the sham preachers. Send me $300 and you're going to get I'll pray for you and you're going to get your job. It's crazy stuff, right? So Hazel makes Asa Hawks nervous. He sees that Hazel is serious, and that's disturbing to him. He wants the veneer that he doesn't believe, but he wants people to believe, so he can convince them to give him money, because he's the preacher, right? He's the means to redemption. So Hawks likes the trappings of Christianity and wants people to believe, even though he's a hypocrite. So it's that tension here that's really an interesting one. The seriousness of Hayes goes all the way down. He can't stand people believing in Christ. He can't stand hypocrites either. As we'll see. Sabbath sees that as well. She says, I like his eyes. She observed, they don't look like they see what he's looking at, but they keep looking. At 105. Hazel's eyes. So, Hazel has the vision that Flannery O'Connor claims you need to recognize what's going on in the novel. Right? You see the images, but you see beneath the images. You look, and you're looking at the appearances, but you're looking through them, down beneath the appearance. So Hazel is actually a serious character. He's comic because he doesn't understand anything of what he's doing, but he's got vision. He's got what she calls the anagogical vision, the ability to see below things, to see below the surface. And this attracts Sabbath for reasons that are unclear even to her. So Hazel now is going to engage in sex to prove he doesn't need Jesus, and he wants to look for somebody else to corrupt. The scenes with the prostitute are dismal and ugly and grotesque. Hazel finds out that Asa Hawks made a promise to blind himself to prove his belief in Jesus. Right? He took quicklime and went to. Can you imagine this? Announced, I'm going to do this in a couple of weeks. People love freak shows. People love circuses. This was a circus. I don't think anybody. Maybe some people wanted to see if he really had faith enough to blind himself, but a lot of people just wanted to see him blind himself. Great spectacles and of the past centuries were when people were executed. Who didn't want to see the public execution? Everybody would show up, right? A public blinding, I'll take a look at that. I'll waste a night for that. The Oedipal thing again, except in the Christian context, right? Oedipus, but seen in the Christian context. The blinding here would be a sign of inward vision, right? To trust that without one's vision, one's psychical sight, one can see spiritual truths. That's the idea there, and it's Oedipus put in a Christian context, and of course it's false and phony. Christianity wouldn't require that. That's really a grotesque interpretation of Christian belief. it doesn't lead, like Oedipus, it doesn't lead to internal insight. It just leads to idiocy and stupidity. Christ worked the opposite way, right? He healed the blind. Um, so the Asa Hawks, we learn, failed to do it. And he instead, the quicklime scarred his face. So he's got the scars of it. It's almost like a mask now that he wears. And the sense that he was possessed by demons to do it, but that Jesus appeared to stay his hand. That's the sense, the explanation for this. We've got the lines of drama more fully detailed here, and we're coming up on an hour, so I'm going to stop there and pick up on chapter 7 for the next lecture.